Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm sharing just the presentation. Later, we'll pass the the ball to the John's yard. My name is Bojan Jordanov, and I'm here with John Blackham from XSOL, and we will speak about the enterprise digital twin, the true digital transformation. Very interesting topic. We are from System Group. This year we set up our group. It's not yet a legal entity. So co-founders Emilian Krumov, he's in the call. Damian, not sure if he will be able to make it, from Budapest, Hungary. You can find more on our website. We will have the contacts at the end of the presentation or on LinkedIn. We have many partnerships, and one of the partnerships is with the XSOL. So I want to give a word to John to introduce himself and XSOL. John.
Thank you, Bojan, and thanks everyone for joining. XSOL is a software company. The product is a digital twin model of business, and I'm not sure how much you're aware of the digital twin concept, but it's basically replicates the real world in a digital form. It actually is started with NASA after Apollo 13, and now all spacecraft and crews are digitally connected in real time to Houston. So if something happens, the people in Houston are as equally as informed as the people on the spacecraft, and they connect as one. Most digital twin products concentrate on product engineering, others in buildings with the built environment, controlling skyscrapers like the ones behind me here in Dubai. But in our case, what we've done is to replicate business in terms of its components, which I'll come on to, but it's basically the structure, the activities, and the resources of an organization. And the key thing with a digital twin is that all the components of that model are linked. That's the purpose of a model. They're all linked. So if you touch one, you know which other parts are affected. So the founders of XSOL came from a previous venture. It was an ERP product that we built and sold around the world. It started off in process manufacturing, ended up supporting just-in-time manufacturing. We sold it, and following that, started XSOL based on the experiences we'd had in implementing ERP. But one of the key things which I promote in terms of what we do with XSOL is this quote from Albert Einstein: "If I can't picture it, I can't understand it." But the point being that when you're dealing with changing a business, dealing with people who work at a desk or behind a machine, you've got to be able to explain things to them in a way where everyone sees the same thing. And if you use words, that's difficult. But if you use pictures, it's much easier. So at this juncture, I will share my screen.
Okay, let me stop sharing from my side. Thank you for your introduction. You're calling all the way from Australia or New Zealand now?
New Zealand today, yep.
New Zealand.
So can you see?
Now you need to start sharing. I stopped sharing.
Share, yeah, okay. Are we good now?
Okay, now we're good. Excellent.
Okay. Right, so the first thing I'd comment on is the words on the bottom of the screen at the right-hand side. And so when we go into a project, the first thing we stress to a client is we must understand, if we're going to do anything, whatever we're implementing, whatever we're automating, we must understand your business very well. In fact, we need to understand your business better than you do, because one of the biggest things which has held back automation is the lack of understanding within business of how their own company operates. And we've got plenty of horror stories about that. But one of the best ways to prove that you do understand what your business is, having created a model of it, is to say, let's simplify it. And if you can simplify it, when you are simplifying, it tends to show things that you've missed. But after that, you can then orchestrate, which we focus on the orchestration part, and then finally the automation, which I'll describe what that means. So this is what you signed up to listen to, and it is predicated on the fact that there's a very high failure rate in ERP implementations, i.e. restarts. So we work with a number of ERP companies, and typically they could have up to 4 restarts. 4 is a bit unusual, but there's never a 5th. It's always lawyers before the 5th. Sometimes it's lawyers before the 4th. But apparently, according to McKinsey, it's even worse for digital transformation projects. So they say that 75%, there were 75% failure rate of projects for tech companies, but for non-tech companies, it's 90% plus, which is sort of an appalling statistic. Anyway, what we're showing is that a digital twin can fix that. This gentleman, his name's Bill Gurley. I don't know if you've heard of him. He is probably one of the best known venture capitalists in the United States, because he was one of the initial funders of Uber. So he got in at 11 million and came out with 8 billion. That's as part of Benchmark Capital. And there's a Netflix movie about Uber called Super Pumped. And so he features, an actor playing him features heavily throughout that. He is, to me, one of the best, most insightful people when it comes to technology. And I've included a link here. So when you get a copy of this, you should be able to click on that link. It's a McKinsey interview. It's very insightful about what he sees as the future of what we're doing in technology. But in 2003, he said automation will transform business. So roughly, he said BPMS, which is Business Process Management Suites, will do for the rest of business what just-in-time did for manufacturing. And he gave a very clear description of how that would happen. And it never did. And so
you need maybe to click on the presentation.
Yeah, no, so I clicked on the wrong thing. Anyway, so in 2005, I was at BPM conference in San Francisco, and the CIO of Chevron Oil was one of the presenters. And he said that they had mapped all the processes in Chevron. And at the end of the presentation, people got to ask questions, and a lady stood up and said, "Wow, that's fantastic. Are you going to automate it?" And he said, "No, all we have is a plate of spaghetti." And that image has stuck with me ever since. So what he meant by that is, I have thousands of processes, unconnected, unjoined. I don't know how they all fit together. They just look like a plate of spaghetti. And that's what the digital twin seeks to improve. Anyway, in 2008, this whole thrust of automating through BPM came to a halt. It was about, I don't know, $7 or $8 billion of investment gone into the various entities. But the average life of an automated process then was 8 months before it was canned, because people would do workarounds when the process wouldn't do what was needed. And one of the founders of the sort of business process management movement was a guy called Peter Fingart. It was a co-author of a book called BPM, The Third Wave, in 2003. And he wrote an article in a magazine called BP Trends, in which he said BPM is dead. And he analyzed why. And it was basically because although it's a business issue, it was taken over by IT. And the point about automation is, first and foremost, it's about business. How does my business work? You know, I can put an ERP product into a company, and it may have an awful fit, but I can force the people to fit to it because it's only a loose number of functions all sort of loosely strung together. In automation, all the functions are tightly coupled. So if you get to a point of an automated system and the user is asked a question, is it black or white? And the answer is, no, it's actually blue, then you can't go any further forward because it has to be black or white. So blue hasn't been catered for and the process stops. One of the organizations I use as although they're not associated with digital twin, well, they use them, but they're not associated with it. But Toyota, through their Toyota production system, to me, showed how to fix these problems. So one of the stories they have is that when they replace a worker with a robot, they will analyze what the person is doing until they're 100% sure they know everything before they give the job to a robot. In America, when General Motors were being beaten by Toyota and Honda, and they saw that Japanese factories were full of robots, they built a plant in the States for a new motor vehicle called Saturn. They filled it with robots, and they couldn't understand, once they'd got the plant working, that it was still producing the same, let's call it rubbish, that they were producing out of their Detroit plants that were basically manual. And it was because all they'd done is transfer all the problems to the robots. This is what I mean by IT capture. This is enterprise architecture. This is an actual example. And we've got some big clients who try to use this stuff. We've got one very large client who's on their third attempt at trying to come up with an enterprise architecture. And it's interesting because we believe we've got the solution, but they're so wedded to the fact that the IT solution is that you have to go through these structures. The problem is that the association, although they'll say all these things are integrated, the association is purely by virtue of layout on paper. These are boxes put next to each other or layers laid on top of each other. It doesn't mean to say they're integrated at all. It's just they look that way. But you can't say that there's an actual link from one level to the next and how it affects things. There's basically no framework. There's no rules, and it's not a model. So there is no integration between the components in this. And if you don't have integration, change is very, very difficult. Because if you touch something, you don't know what else is affected. So basically, the problem is, from my perspective, that we've been trying to force a square peg, the IT view of the world, into a round hole, which is the business view of the world. And this is the result, which we mentioned before. So the problem is IT, sorry?
Can I interrupt for a while? Normally, when we start with ERP implementations, I kick off with a presentation that shows statistics from 1998. I don't know if it was McKinsey, but it shows all the statistics about how ERP and CRM projects fail. And it's pretty much what you're sharing now, 20 something years.
It just hasn't changed. We were invited into a large ERP vendor because they had a new COO. When the COO said, my mission, having been hired, is I have to reduce restart rate, which was 75% failure, right? So they restart 75% of their projects. And I need to do that. So we started helping him, but within a very short space of time, their IT people had taken over, and what I call all the vested interests had taken over, and they just carried on doing it the way they'd done it before, generating huge amounts of paper of all things, listed and whatever. It's very difficult to convince people that there is actually a simple solution. It's one of the reasons I like mathematics at school was, if you're doing a pure maths problem, I loved it if I could do it in 2 lines when everybody else was doing it on 2 pages. That was like, oh, I've got the solution. And that's what I call the Einstein principle. You express the complexity of the universe in E equals mc squared. I mean, it's like a lovely simple equation. Anyway, the point about needing an integrated definition of business, ask a business person to describe their business. Don't worry about all this other stuff. Just say, how does your business work? From the top to the bottom. Well, you just describe it. You describe it. The problem they've got is that at the moment, generally, they lack the tools to help them. The tools that are available, Visio and things like that, are basically IT oriented, and they don't reflect the actual structure of a business. So, simple solution to this problem: make business responsible for defining their own system. So rather than IT coming along and saying, here, we've done a wonderful system for you, you told us what you wanted, here it is, and then get into all sorts of problems, you say, well, you design the system, you define it, you create the model, and we'll support it to make it work. And a digital twin is ideal because it replicates, it copies the user's world. When you define things in a digital twin, one of the rules is that anything you've defined in a digital model, I can say, show me in the real world where that is. So you can't use, well, you can't use products that use swim lanes, because if I go into a factory floor and say, where is your swim lane? People will laugh at me, right? Because they don't use swim lanes, right? That's an IT construct. So digital twin is a framework. It describes how business is organized, how it works, and this ensures consistency. So it enables people to define process with the accuracy and the complexity required to automate workflows, automate task flows, and automate data entry, enterprise-wide. So the key thing about digital twin model is there are three components, three basic components, right? The organization, how it's structured. That's how it's structured from a people control point of view, from the CEO down to a position in the accounts office at a desk, and also spatially. So we've got our head office over here, we've got two warehouses over there and whatever. And then inside the head office, we've got these offices, and here's the accounts room and whatever. So you're describing everything spatially, because once again, you're trying to describe the real world version of that business. So the next thing then are the activities that take place within that organization. So those are processes. And then finally, the resources that are used in the processes. And resources come in many forms. So we have simple, obvious ones like inventory, people, machines, vehicles, offices, money. But we also have intangible ones, such as software or knowledge, etc. Even customers, people said, oh, customers are, you wouldn't call customers a resource. And I said, well, you tell that to Facebook, or Meta as it is now, because to them, that is the only resource. That's how they make their money. And that's how everyone should view customers and suppliers. So it's a model. It integrates, it's an integrated framework with relational components. It makes everything change capable. You could add or alter with integrity. And the great thing is you can start the definition anywhere. You can start at the top, you can start anywhere, and you know that everything will connect up in the end. So the benefits here, you can define business really quickly because you can start with an existing model. So if you've already modeled, let's say, a distribution company with a warehouse, and we're doing this right now. We're working with a company, and I just took our standard distribution model and just put their logo in and made a few changes to their floor layout to represent their warehouse structure, and was able to create a pretty good approximation to their business in about 5 hours, because it's easy to change. The thing about digital twin model, because things are connected, if you try to break a connection, it will tell you. If you try to delete something that's used somewhere else and say you can't delete it, then it will give you a where used. you can choose to keep it updated, or you can leave it as it is, and then the next time you come to do a big job, a transformation or a new ERP or whatever, you can quickly update it to the current state. The reason I say that is that keeping a model updated, and I don't care whatever model it is expensive, because you have to have audit. If you ask people in an organization to keep their model updated, they won't do it. So you have to audit to make sure they are doing it. So the sort of companies that do that, General Motors, for example, are all automotive assemblers, insist that their suppliers provide proof, documented proof, that what they're doing is what's documented.
John,
and General Motors.
Sorry for interrupting. We have a question from Roberta. Maybe it was a slide back. Roberta, do you want to speak up or?
Hello. Hi. Nice to meet you, John.
Nice to meet you.
My question is, does this work in very early stages, say a startup just about to organize, where hierarchies are not defined and rules are shifting really fast?
Absolutely. In fact, it's one of the best things for startups because it has a framework. So you can fill in the framework. So that, let's see if, where's my go back? I can't see it. I won't bother going back. I'll probably screw it up. But in that description where I showed you the structure, the activities, and the resources, each of those pieces have got a framework and rules associated with them. So when you come to, for example, define the main processes within the organization, you're not creating them from scratch. You're just pulling out the framework and putting the names in and just adding components in from a set of predefined set of components. And all the components know their relationship with one another. But again, typically I would start with an existing model. And if it's a new startup and they've got very limited activities, I just delete large parts of the model that would not apply to them, or just hide those. So just on that point about keeping things updated. So what we find is that automotive assemblers and medical device companies who are governed by government regulation, they have to keep their things updated, but it costs you a lot. So we recommend that for most companies, they wait till the next time they want to use the model and then update it. And it would take them, you know, if you're doing, we got involved with one organization and it was going to take a year for them to model, this was using Signavio, it's going to take them a year to model the company's operations. Apart from the fact they said, well, this is ridiculous, we can use something existing, we've got one very close, we can do it in 3 weeks, which they wouldn't believe, which we could have done easily. You know, the problem is that when they've spent that year and a lot of money defining the model, they can't reuse it because it's not designed, it doesn't have the integrated components. So one of the other things is you can progressively automate pieces. We've got a large client that's automating their business, or their IT department is, and they've got into trouble because they're now automating all these pieces, and people are saying, well, how does that connect with this, that, and the other? And they're creating what we used to call way back in the dark days, islands of automation. So if you're talking to a business owner or CEO or senior manager, why should you be interested in a digital twin? And the reason is it increases wealth. Now you can define that any way you like. It increases shareholder value. It increases the ability to pay workers over the normal rate. But basically, you get a lot greater return from your activity than you would without it. So that's all. The digital twin itself does not do that. It's actually because the digital twin enables you to automate. It facilitates automation. It's actually the automation that increases the productivity. So we have this saying here that it takes the dead air out of business. So we had two clients who showed this to us. So one was making cosmetics, and the other one was a brewery making Heineken beer. And they said, oh, in both cases, well, we want to automate our new product development process because it takes a long time and lots of things go wrong, and we want to automate it to make sure it's all done properly. And in both cases, we said, well, how long does it take right now? And they both said 18 months. Now, through my previous experience with ERP, we'd had a couple of brewery clients there, and I knew that for if you're creating a new beer, you've got a minimum 6-week period of fermenting and trying out, creating the right batch that gives you the right result that you're going to bottle. So the 6 weeks. Now, you don't have that when you're making shampoo. What we found was that in both cases, they had about 50 steps to go from, from the beginning, the initial let's do this idea, through to off to the shops. And what it showed was that each stage in the process spent 1 week on someone's desk. So they basically get the work on Monday, they do nothing about it. On Friday, they said, oh, I'd better do this. And then they do it, and it's on the next person's desk on Monday, and then they sit on it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we call dead air. So what we do is we highlight the amount of time that things are sitting around. And with automation, you can say, if this hasn't moved in 15 minutes, give it to somebody else or notify the manager or whatever. So you've got all sorts of control over that flow of work. The other thing with why digital twin in this instance is its responsiveness. Right now, I was on a conference call with a fairly big organization, and they're saying, right, well, our board and our senior management are all concerned about the fact that things are changing all the time. We've got financial pressure, we've got supply chain pressure, and we've got lots of different things happening, and we've got to be able to respond to them all. Now, the energy pricing was particularly important to them as well. So, how are we going to be able to change our systems? Well, that's what digital twin allows. So the key there is that it increases responsiveness and enables you to change systems in near real time. The way you do this is the diagram of traditional software development cycle, whether it's waterfall or agile. You go through, requirements, design, code, test, and you may agile cycle round, but ultimately, you're going to go live, and you're going to do a beta test and go live. And that will take anywhere from a small change, 36 hours, up to 36 weeks, let's say. Digital twin, you eliminate that code and test bit, because basically what you're doing is that you're defining in the model with business people, and you are defining in the model what their process does. And very, very early on in the piece, you actually create a runtime version of that of the process, and you can actually, because it's a model, it works. Any data in that model is accurate. You can't put something into a model that puts it out of step. So basically, you can make a change, and as soon as you've made the change, you don't need to test it. You just push a button and it's in production. So what we found with our clients, we automated now, is that you go through this iteration of change and putting it in front of people, and then picking up their changes, etc. So we did this at T-Mobile, which is a phone company in the States, part of Deutsche Telekom, or owned by Deutsche Telekom. And the process that we put in it was a business process outsourcing company that worked for T-Mobile, was activating mobile phone SIM cards. And we actually did it using the top approach. So it was all online because the agents were in the Philippines and the companies in the States, and we were in New Zealand, so it's all online. So we went through the normal system and design and build and test, well, not so much test, but put users in front of it, etc. And then training and go live. And we had 2 of our people with the agents when they went live. Now, there were anywhere from 200 to 500 agents processing these SIM requests. So T-Mobile would have on average 300,000 SIM new phone connections a month. And within 1 hour of going live, the supervisor in charge of the go live said, "Ooh, we've got a major problem. We've forgotten about something, and it's a showstopper." Under normal conditions, we would have had to have halted the pilot, taken the software away, modified it, tested it, and then rescheduled to go live. Because we didn't.
We have somebody to ask questions. It's Jan Exmos. Jan, please unmute on.
Yes. Oh, still carrying an old name from yesterday. Okay, fair enough. Quick question to a slide before about the automation, the automated workflow. How does a digital twin differ from a workflow automation system where you actually can also obviously reflect or build new processes and test them out? What's the difference?
Okay, the key thing with a digital twin is that the components, I mean, the digital twin has 3 major things going for it. One is the content of the digital twin absolutely reflects the real life situation within the organization, which means that when people are defining what they do, they don't have to deal with any concepts. They're just saying, okay, well, what do I do at my desk? You know, what desk does it go to after that, and etc. So you're using a structure, a framework, which exactly replicates how people work. So number 2 then is now we've got that, an accurate way of defining how things work. The second thing is that a model is, and the best example of a model, which you will be familiar with, is a spreadsheet. If you go and create a spreadsheet and you want to, add up some columns and rows and do some calculations, you don't have to put it through system testing, because you know that if the model has accepted what you put in, it's going to give you the right answer. You don't have to system test or beta test the answer. I mean, you may have put in incorrect data, but anyone can do that. So that's the benefit of a model. Obviously, digital twin model business is many times more complex than a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet's got 3 variables, columns, rows, and cells, and we have, I think, last count, about 24 variables in our digital twin. So that's the second thing, is that the components are related, and therefore, when you go to make a change, you know if you're affecting something. The best example I could give is that Price Waterhouse, consulting firm, use our software. And they said that typically an assignment, they go and do a report for someone, change the business, new ERP system, whatever. He said typically they'll put in 3 weeks of work on average to do this. And on the last day, they will present to the board of directors their suggestions or their recommendations as to what to do. And they said always the day before we present to the board, we go back through the company and we check the content of our report to make sure it's correct. And invariably, there are things wrong that we've got to correct. So assuming we're out of town, we all get back to the hotel. At 6 o'clock, we start making the changes. And with a bit of luck, we've finished making the changes by 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It said with XSOL, we were finished within 30 minutes. And the point was that when they were changing their reports, their documents, if they made a change, they had to then check the whole document to make sure that they hadn't changed inadvertently, clashed with something else. In our case, if you touch something, you can just do a where used and say, where else is this thing used within the model? I'm mindful of time. Yeah, sorry. That was it Xmas your real name?
No. I used it yesterday for another reason. So no, that's it answered my question. Thank you very much,
okay.
John. And please continue with your, don't sidetrack any longer because of me. Thank you.
Okay, so just finishing off that story at T-Mobile, we made the change for them in 1 hour, and the agents had an early break for morning tea. Then they came back and carried on, and then the same thing happened 4 other times that day. On Tuesday, it happened 5 times again, and on Wednesday, the agents were asking for change. They said, "Can you change this? Can you change that?" So we'd got a contract target of a 25% improvement in throughput, which we met by the Wednesday. And on the Friday, thanks to all the changes that the agents had requested, we'd increased the throughput to 50%. And that was because I don't know how many changes the guys made. They made a lot of changes during that week. So anyway, that's the point of our digital twin model. So let's look at the detail of it. So, just a quick example. So one of our clients were fully automated. A clothing manufacturer, they supply department stores in Australasia. And they got a facility in China, in Hangzhou, where they handle all the orders. So they take an order for a department store in the store in wherever it is, whatever city, and then that goes to China to the distribution center, who then pick out 3 factories to ask for quotes based on, they know what factories are good at making things, and then that cycles around. By automating the whole process, the CEO reported in a business magazine they'd increased their productivity 10-fold. He made a lot of money. They'd reduced the order to cash cycle time by 80%. So prior to that, doing new season clothing would take a 9-month cycle. We reduced it to 6 weeks. And the owner made a lot of money. So what exactly is automation? It comes in 3 forms. So one is managing the flow of work between people and or robots. So you have a person at a desk doing something, and then you could have a robot rather than the person at a desk, a person on a machine in the factory. And so what we're doing there is knowing who's next, so that when the piece of work has been done, it's immediately passed to the next person or the next machine or the next robot or whatever in the flow. At each desk, or each stage as we call it, we manage the flow of the tasks that a person or robot has to do. And what we're basically doing there to make the improvement is we're taking away the need for decision making. So if you take the T-Mobile example, their agents to activate a new SIM card could take anywhere from 8 to 12 steps, but it could be any one of 50 different tasks. So the tasks varied depending on the circumstances. And so the agents had to learn 50 different decisions. If it's this, do that. If it's that, do the other. And quite often they'd get it wrong. So the contract between T-Mobile and the process outsourcing company was they required 92.7% successful activations, or the company was penalized. When we had gone live, that had increased to 100%. There were no errors made because the decision making was taken away from the agents, as was quite a number of the tasks as well. We made the tasks robot tasks. The last form of automation is what you may be familiar with, RPA or just ERP, but it's entering data, it's managing the flow of data in a form. So a task may be enter an order, and then there is a sequence of activity for keying in the data into that order. And it may be controlled by a person keying it in, or you give it to RPA or something similar that does it automatically. What we discovered, though, was that the benefit that an organization gets from these 3 types of organizations, 60% of it comes from workflow, 25% from managing task flow, and just 15% from managing the data flow in forms. But automation suffers from, number one, if you don't exactly define how a process is performed, that will kill it. not catering for exceptions, right? One of the things that I've seen written by companies in the BPM, business process management space, is you don't have to be, you don't have to be 100% accurate. Well, you do if you want to automate. You have to know if there's an exception, because as I said before, if someone's asked, is it black or white? And they look at it and it's red, they just stop. There's nothing they can do. So you have to identify the exceptions, just like in Toyota, before they give the person's job to a robot, they identify the exceptions and then build it into the robot.
I want to jump in, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
So about the percentage of the benefits, what I come from my practice is when companies approach us, we want to implement CRM, ERP, etc. They very often they have like a draft of their requirements, so like initial documents to do. Then we want to really understand their business. Otherwise, we are not able to help them. One of the things that we discover, they go to, let's say, automation. So we want all our systems to get fed with data directly. But in fact, really some of their biggest problems are what you show here in the people-to-people, desk-to-desk relationship, that when they improve, it's they need to fine-tune what is happening in reality in their actual work. So this is we also have a question in the chat. It's quite long from Roberta again. Maybe Roberta, you can jump in and say.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Well, I'm, as you might have understood already, I'm working for a no-profit and creative startup. We publish writers. It's citizen journalism. And so there is plenty of things that take a very human approach in, for instance, a chief editor choosing what article we want to publish or not, we can or not because of editorial lines or whatever, quality of the writing. And I really don't see how we can automatize that. But we could automatize the managing of other parts.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, you're talking about intellectual activity.
Yes.
And, there's a rumor that AI will take that over. I mean, AI will be coming, there's no question, but right now AI is still very in its infancy. So yeah, you're not going to replace people who do, that's what I said before, brain work is going to be the thing of the future. And that's, you're not going to replace that for a long time. No, I mean, if you're, the organization you're talking about, you have to say, well, how do I better manage the work that's being done? I'm not going to take away the work from people in the situation you talk about, because that's just not going to be possible. But maybe if I could just, you may better understand it if I just go over to the next piece. So the key thing here, when you're looking at an organization, is to say, okay, everyone, I don't care, non-profit, for example, we work with libraries, we work with all sorts of organizations, and they're all the same, that they, it's about you as an organization create some sort of value. Whether you're training people and putting them out in the field to consult or do something, or whether you're creating a product or whatever it is, you're creating some sort of value. And to do that, you have to acquire some things, such as people or premises or materials. And then obviously there has to be a demand for it. So you're going to sell or rent whatever it is you do. And so you've got these two external sets of functions, and then the internal. And we promote in fact, I mean, to me, it should be mandatory that anything you're defining, when you're defining a process, it must be end to end. In fact, I'm sitting here in Dubai, and the organization that I was working for there, the CIO insisted that all their processes were end to end. So we had quote to cash and procure to pay, and for HR, we had hire to retire, which was pleasant because in America they have the same thing called hire to fire, which shows a slight difference in attitude. So in this case, we talk about primary transactions being those main transactions. So in the case of demand, it's something like a sale to a customer from quote to cash. So we end up saying, well, to define where these are, we're asking, well, what resource does this transaction deliver? Is it a person? Is it a service? Is it a product? And what is the source of demand? Because that demand is also a resource. And as I say, end to end. The other thing then is that, okay, if I've got my main transaction, like sale to a customer, and this is where, talk about the spaghetti issue. So I've got my main transaction quote to cash, but at a certain point in it, I actually use a third party logistics company to deliver the goods to the customer. So I've got this other transaction now, which I have to trigger. Now that is a supply transaction, which I'm integrating with into my main transaction. So I'll just hover over that. So basically, when you're in your primary transaction, like these external ones, there are 4 legs. Somebody will order something, you'll deliver it, again, product or service, you'll request payment, and then you'll get payment. And those are 4 legs of any transaction. If you're a library, we won't have customers, you'll have patrons, and the patron will order or request, take a book, which is the delivery part, but you only invoice them, bill them once a year for a subscription, let's say, and then they pay. So these things are actually, there can be multiple instances of any of these legs. But when we connect up a subsidiary transaction, what you see here is that halfway through the first leg, we're going to send a request to the logistics company to come and deliver our goods, and then they come back to us and say, yes, we accept that, and then they turn up and you give them the goods, and then you tell them when they tell you when it's been received, and then you invoice. So that's how they interact. And in this example here, this is an airline, another company we dealt with, and so here in this demand process, their primary transaction is, if ever you take an airline journey, they call it a customer journey, and they call it from shop to post-flight. And there are several external subsidiary transactions that integrate with it, but one in particular, baggage handling, which we'll show down here, because when we look at the transaction in more detail, shop to post-flight, the first stage is that they've got a customer who's looking to see which airline to go with, then they purchase the tickets, then there'll be pre-flight where they turn up and their bags get taken away and handled, and then they're going to be in flight where they buy things on the plane, and then they arrive and the baggage comes back to them, etc., and the flight's closed off. So these here are the stages, as we call them, the steps, and these are the individual tasks that are done. So pre-flight, for example, and maybe checking your passport, taking your baggage and labeling it, and issuing your ticket. That's probably not a good example, but the idea is that you can have the things that people actually do are tasks. So just a couple more. Here is an example. This is what we use to show how all this hangs together. So here we have our suppliers on one side, where we source, and what we're doing with them, we're exchanging value. So they give us some material, a resource, a person, or a product, or they lease offices to us, and we pay them in return. So we exchange value exactly the same way with the customer. And then internally, we create value. So it all starts with demand, and the first thing you have to do is to identify demand. So here's our demand starting, and it's got 2 legs. Now it's got 4 legs. And the demand calls on a product or a service which you've got to have created. And that itself will call on things that you need, which will be, as I say, materials or people or you know, buildings, equipment, trucks, and money. And again, it's an external transaction, so it's a 4-leg transaction. Internally, the transactions are only 2-leg. But in addition to this, we have other activities. So resources that we acquire, we could use them to create something. So we could buy components and build a product and ship it out, or we could buy machines, which we reuse. And it's the same with people. So when we hire people, they become a reusable resource. And what we do then is we increase the value of these. So if it's a machine, we service it, we do maintenance to extend its life. It's a person, we train it. So we've got processes which are designed to maintain the usefulness of the resource. But then up here, what we have also is, which these things don't normally appear in ERP systems, but we have processes that create strategy, and from that create plans. So we're looking at plans to create demand, and plans for managing supply, and then plans for managing value creation. So these blue ones are the internal value creation, and these green ones are the external. So just 2 more things to show. Excuse me. So this was put together for a customer just recently. It's rather hasty, so it's not totally accurate, but it took an hour or so. But so here we're saying, what are the sources of demand from that customer? So the customer could put demand on us through a service order, please service my product or my machine, warranty claims, inquiries, the ordering product, and making payment. And over here are the equivalent on the supply side, but the main ones here you can see are the value creation processes. So over here we've got, well, how do we create market demand? So we have processes for acquiring new customers. We have processes for providing customers with support to make sure they are good customers, and we reach out to them and we make sure they're happy. We go to trade shows, we give them, in this case, their customers are actually resellers. So they were giving the resellers product training. And then they were doing specific product engineering for people. And here, they're creating the processes which create the value which they actually then use to meet demand. So order fulfillment process, the quote to cash, case management, customer rings up and says, I've got a problem. They open the ticket and sort it out. And in this case, they've got specialist things like calibration and configuration. And down the bottom, we've got these maintenance processes for maintaining people and machines and product and money. So the last one I'll show you is right at the beginning, I said, we use this quote from Einstein. If I can't picture it, I can't understand it. And so we specialize in visualization. So we use this hand-drawn illustration just to literally to illustrate visualization, because we have customers who use blueprints, layouts of their business. We've got one which is an injection molding company that uses a 180-degree camera from a gantry that shows a whole factory floor. And other people use 3D models, which you can get from people like Fiverr, etc. But the point is that you can use this for explaining to people how the business works. And in the last minute, I will show you what I mean. This is actually off our website, so you can look at this at your leisure. But you can see the visualization workflow knowledge base. Good. So by visualization, what we mean is here, you've got a large organization with offices and facilities in these various countries, but you can click on them and, you're just dropping icons onto an image. And here we've got a factory, and we click on the factory, there's our factory again, and we can click on the sales office, and here's the sales office, and I can click on this person, and there is their ERP program that they're currently using. And they can do this, and they can actually, because it brings up the software, brings up the ERP software, they can go and key the order in or whatever. Over here, we've got the same thing, but this time with the warehouse. In this case, we've got slightly different office layout, but the same sort of thing. In this case, this is a guy who's entering, keeping a spreadsheet of quotes to look at forward revenue flows. But you can see here how we've linked many things onto this image. So in a factory situation, you can have a link to every machine. And in this case, here's a document describing the setup instructions. Here's a document which you download and fill out for quality assurance. Over here, we've got a video which explains how to use a pallet wrapping machine. Here, we're linking to our logistics company's website for placing orders. And over here, we're looking at a buyer in the purchasing office, and these are the things that the buyer does. So I can select one of these processes that they initiate, or one of that they take part in these other processes. And over here, we have our flow. This is our main sales process. So if we look at the workflow itself, so this is just obviously stylized just to give the impression, but you can see the flow that the order takes. So if we click on that, this is obviously a very simple kind of process, but it's done just so you can see what's involved. So this desk to desk to desk, this is a rather, it's been a while, and we've upgraded our presentation icons nowadays, but this is quite useful. So I click on the desk, and here are the tasks that the person undertakes when they take the order. So is it an e-order, fax order, email, etc. And then they enter the ERP system, and if there's a problem or insufficient stock, they ring the customer, and will the customer back order or things like that. And in this case, because again, this was a real life example, they had a situation where they updated a paper form and then they filed them on Friday. Really a little bit strange, but we weren't in a situation where they wanted to change things. But if we, oops, so it shouldn't have. Let's do that again.
Yes, okay.
So here, by clicking this, you integrate. You brought up instructions as to how to complete that particular piece of work. The thing I'm showing here is that, okay, we need to change the system. So we're going to add a new desk, a new thing here. So there's a change. Is it X factory? Yes. Well, we need a wait period or something we have to do before we carry on. So that's what we do to make a change. But when we take the order, when you're doing the discovery and going to the customer, what you can do, what we do, which I try to do, is if they'll let me, take photographs. So if this was for a new ERP implementation, this was for putting in Microsoft Dynamics, that's what they wanted to buy. And you can see their old ERP system, which was very specialized because it was carpet manufacture. This is their old DOS-based system. But I took photographs of all the screens so that when you do the comparison with what you had with Dynamics, you can see if it was going to work. And over here, you had a situation where you printed the sales order. There were half a dozen printers in the room and fax machines. And I said, well, which one does it come out of? So I took a photograph of it and said, okay, well, that's where you're going to pick up the order. Then the final thing here, again, because it's a model, you know who does what. So the who is based on roles. So here we are in distribution. Go back. In distribution, I've got dispatch people, warehouse people, inwards goods, inspection, etc. So the dispatch people are doing these stages, and the warehouse people are doing these stages. If I go down to purchasing, you see here, that's what the purchasing people are doing. There is then, this is a lean analysis. So here, what we're looking at is, this is approve and pay accounts payable. So what we're looking at here are the stages in that activity. And we've looked at what they do at the task level and defined it in terms of value add, non-value add, and essential non-value add. So here you can see the individual tasks and what they were rated at. So receiving the invoice was nothing we can do about it. It takes us 35 minutes. Creating the invoice batch, it's value add because entering it is value add, but all these other things, they kept an Excel spreadsheet, a receipt of all invoices they produced, and that was a waste of time, etc. So the last one here is just adding information into your model. In this case, for ISO accreditation, this was for a company making electrical transformers for hydroelectric schemes. So that was, final thing. So what we have here is when I said, understand and simplify. So what we recommend to people is that they take that initial process and then they break it into, this is essential. So you can't get away with that. You've got to do these things. But this stuff down here is administrative, and maybe you could get rid of it. So we've just used yellow boxing to show those that we think, well, you should get rid of those. And that's how you help people to understand how you can improve it. And I think, yep, that's it. That is everything. And I'm sorry, but I'm 6 minutes over.
No, it's okay. We had some questions. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. We had a question about the costing, how much the licensing. I will contact Vasil, and if somebody is interested, we can discuss in a call. Something to say is we used XSOL in for several different clients. There is something. I go back to your presentation. So this model, when you create a model, you also need to take care of it, because when it's your real life situation and then you also use it to automate some of the processes, you need to take really care of it. So it's not like you start a project, you create a snapshot, even with a good tool, then you can end up that it's not used, old-fashioned, and totally does not reflect the reality. So for startups, what was touched is you can also use the tool to describe how you dream to be, but it's very important what is really happening in the reality So thank you again. Pretty much we finished. If somebody has to say something as closing, and to the recording of this session and the presentation will be shared on our website, and you will get a follow-up email with links. Any questions?
Yeah,
or maybe John, you want to say something?
I was going to say, I know just the slide I've just put up to leave you with is what is the essence of using a digital twin. And it's a model, and it gives you benefits which you can't get without it. If I'm doing a sales presentation, I quite often show the battleship Potemkin in a model, and in a diagram. So here's a plan of the battleship Potemkin, a nice drawing of what it looks like from the side. And here is a model, which is in 3D. And I can walk around the model and I can see how all the things relate. Whereas if I look at a 2D picture, it looks great, but I don't know how all the components relate to one another. And that's the difference between something like Visio or Signavio or Aris or whatever, and a digital twin, 2D versus 3D.
Well, we can dive into the use cases of XSOL. It's another.
Yeah. We actually have, obviously we've got a presentation which goes through various use cases and shows both a whole variety of different environments. We have non-profit healthcare, architecture firm out of Singapore, a national electricity grid, and our friends at T-Mobile. So we've got these different use cases and we can show the different examples of how people use this to their benefit. And we can also go through the particular, obviously haven't gone through the particular output, so it's just that very last brief run, but we produce a dozen different forms of output to help analysis of transactions.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's quite late at your side, yes?
For me, it's early. We do, our main activity is out of the UK and in Europe. And so we've got partners in Austria and in our main partners in the UK.
Thank you for your time. It was very interesting.
This is normal time for me.
Reflected the real world. Hope it was also valuable for our guests who made it join. And on that note, I'm closing. Thank you, and we will keep in touch.
Thank you, Boyan. Thank you, everyone. If anyone has any questions, feel free to email me. And Boyan will share my email address and my phone number.
Okay, I will do. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Okay, bye.